Hi, I'm immigration lawyer John Khosravi. Thank you for tuning in and watching this video. Today we're going to talk about the documents you need when you're doing a fiancé or marriage green card. So it's a very important question I get asked frequently because there's a lot of different pieces of information and paperwork that are required in this process, and it varies depending on the foreign person's background, the U.S. person's background, if they're going to go through the embassy or through USCIS to complete the work, if they have criminal history, arrest, and all sorts of different things that become important in the process. We're going to do a general overview right now of the main things that every case needs. And sometimes you might need to hire a lawyer to get more specific information to adjust the case to what you require. But I want to spend this time right now to go over the basic documents needed for a marriage green card case. Thanks again for watching. We're going to start talking about the whole process for a marriage green card so you get an idea of each step, how things look like, because it's different for every type of step and depending on the situations and facts of the particular case. So first and foremost, a green card case based on marriage or even a fiancé visa case has three major parts to it which we have to prepare documents for. First of all, is this a real relationship? Is this marriage real? And that focus on the bona fide nature of the relationship has documentary requirements to satisfy and show the government that this is not a fake relationship. Secondly, they want to look at the background of the foreign person. Is their background okay? And there's documents that are there used for those purposes. And third, the financial portion, which is, will this person be a public charge? Will they be able to live in the United States and not have to request money from the U.S. government? And so that's a separate analysis that requires documentation as well. Each of these three I could go on for a long time talking about the details, but we're going to go through the typical case so we have an understanding if it fits your case. And as always, consult with an immigration attorney in private because each case is different and you need individual legal advice. This is general education only. So going back to the first one, proof of relationship. Some people have longer relationships, some have shorter, and obviously the longer relationship you have, the more documentation and paperwork you have to prove it. Now, keep in mind, the Immigration Department only gets paper documents, so if you have videos and stuff, you cannot use those. But the typical things they like to see is financial history. One of them comes with property or lease agreements that have both of your names on them. Also bank accounts, a history of bank accounts and or credit cards becomes really important. Now, something clients do is sometimes they open an account and don't use it, but they just have the same name on it. That itself does not have much value. They want to see a real account that has money go in it, it's used, money goes down, money comes in, and that's the way they want to see it. Now, sometimes, especially if you're applying for adjustment of status in the United States, at the time of filing, you could start a bank account that's new, so it doesn't have much money in there, which is okay. But by the time the interview happens, you want to regularly use that account so when at the interview, they see the updated bank statements, they show that it's an active account. So the financial portion being, a residence as either ownership of property or lease agreement, and bank accounts, checking accounts, maybe having someone as part of your will. All these become really important to show that, you're putting your money where your mouth is. You really love your spouse and you're showing that love by trusting them with your money. And so that's a really important indicator for immigration. Now, sometimes people may have joint health insurance accounts, joint car insurance, all sorts of insurance that has both their names on it. Could even be renter's insurance. And as you see, this is more skewed to people who are living together, most likely already in the United States. So and that helps them because if the spouse is overseas or the fiancé is overseas, they may not have those kind of documents. But in those kind of cases, you can make up for it by records of their interactions and communications. This could happen through apps, for example, to show that they consistently talk with each other, especially for newer relationships. Another thing that we do is travel history. So if you've flown to see each other or went on vacations together, we get the flight receipts that show you were on the same plane together, the stamps in your passport show you went to the same locations together, and in general it shows that you're doing a lot of different stuff together, so obviously it's a real relationship. Another thing is photos together, obviously. Now, we have clients sometimes come that don't like taking photos. It's, some people don't like taking photos, but it's not a good idea not to have photos. It's not the biggest thing to have photos, but what I think psychologically, when an officer is reviewing your case and they're looking at forms and papers and numbers and bank accounts, having color photos of who the couple are, and it gives them a special feeling to say, oh, this is a real person. It's just not another case number for me. This is a human being and a couple that are in love, and they can see that love in their eyes, especially if you provide wedding photos, for example. It makes them feel soft, and I think it psychologically helps the case a lot. So it's really mandatory that you have photos together, and then have photos with family and friends too to show you're part of a group. You're putting yourself out there as a couple. And if you've been on vacations, let's say you went somewhere famous, you went to Las Vegas and have photos next to the famous hotels there. You went to Paris, you're next to the Eiffel Tower, or wherever it is, that says a lot as well that you're traveling together. So as you see, there's a lot of documentation you could use based on your history relationship. So what you have to do is go back, think about all the things you did together. Did you write birthday cards together? Did you write Happy Valentine's Day cards together? Do you have those? Well, scan those and use those copies as well. It's very important to date those. So when you are writing these cards, put the date on them so you can reference, oh, this was 2018 when we wrote this. This was 2019. Now, some couples may have it easier because they have children, so the birth certificate from the children could satisfy that. But many of the couples have newer marriages that come to me, so that doesn't exist. But another thing that we do is do what's called a medical directive. I ask my clients to say, hey, get this form signed that says if I'm sick and I can't make a decision for myself, my spouse could make that decision. And so that's another way of showing that we're a real couple. We trust each other with our money, with our health, with our future, with our property, all that kind of stuff. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. Once you sit down, talk with an attorney in a consultation, when you contact my office, for example, we go and just go through the relationship. We find stuff that we can use. There's the typical stuff, the examples I talked about to show the relationship is real and documented. And sometimes there's atypical stuff. There's things that people do that are different from other people. We could use those as well. It's popped up in my head. Wedding cards are really important. That's not something atypical. A lot of people do those. But if you have wedding cards, you can use that as well. You can also use letters from family and friends, affidavits from them that attest to the reality of the relationship. Those have to be done properly. You don't want to write those well, so they cover all the information needed in a declaration or affidavit. But as you see, there's a lot of different things that could happen. You accumulate those as evidence of the relationship to prove that this is a real relationship, and you keep it up. So, they may ask for more later at an interview, so you want to keep updating this information. Plus, if your marriage is new, you're going to get a conditional green card, which means they're going to want more information, evidence of the relationship 2 years after getting their green card during the removal of condition phase. And at that time, they're going to want to see more of these documents and updated versions of these documents. So you don't want to stop doing this, frankly, until you get U.S. citizenship. Just keep a file on your computer where you constantly upload these things. It might be utility bills together, for example, that have both your names on them. Gas bill, car bill, the internet. But all this kind of stuff can be used to show the joint relationship. Now, rarely there are officers that just won't believe any of it, even if it's an obvious case. And those are times, you got to argue and fight it. But generally, that's what I use and that's what I submit for my cases to prove that the relationship is real. So that was the first of the 3 things that I looked at for a marriage green card case or even a fiance case to show this relationship exists in various ways and that it's going to continue. It's not a fake relationship. They're in love. They're getting married because they have a real relationship. The second thing is looking at the background of the applicant. Now, there's an asterisk between the first and second one. If the petitioner, the U.S. person, has been convicted of certain very bad, aggressive sexual crimes towards minors, there is a thing called the Walsh Act that could prevent them from giving a green card to a spouse, and they have to do a lot of work to try to overcome that and waive that situation. But that's rare, but that would require a lot of documentation on its own. But with regards to the main parts of the case, they really want to look at the foreign person's background. And they do that by looking at their passport, primarily birth certificate, any previous marriage and divorce certificates, which should be included in that first part as well, to make sure who they've been with, who they're married with. They want to see birth certificates of all children. That would be included in that first part as well. But here they want to do a civil document analysis of the person. If they're going through consular processing, which is getting the green card or visa through the embassy, they want to see a police certificate for every country they've really ever lived in. There's timetables on that, but definitely the home country and the country they're at that time. If they're inside the United States, they do not ask for police certificates, but if there have been arrests and convictions, they want to see records of those. So they're really analyzing to make sure, who is this person? Is it a good person? Is this someone who want to come to the United States? And they do that with the police certificate. If you've been in the military history, documentation of, at the end of the military service and what you did while you were in military service, along as I just said, birth certificates, passports, any other civil documents, marriage, divorce, birth certificates of children, all that kind of stuff to show your background. Plus, there's forms you complete that ask a lot of background information. If you answer one of them wrong, that could trigger more documents. But a typical case, that's what you need, the basic civil documents to show your background, and potentially police records and court records to show you're clear in that sense. So seems pretty straightforward. Most cases it is, but every once in a while someone marks no on one of those boxes where they should mark yes, and that triggers a lot more documents. But the general average case doesn't need those, and all the documents I mentioned are enough. And sometimes people do name changes, might need their name change certificate. So there's always little nuances that pop up in each case, but that's the general overview of it. The third thing they look at, which is getting more and more complicated under President Trump's administration, is the financial background. Now, historically, they would just want to see that the U.S. person who's sponsoring the marriage case makes more than between 20 and 25,000 over the last couple of years. That would satisfy enough. We would send their tax return, their W-2 or 1099s that came with that tax return, and that would suffice. But nowadays, not only do I send the tax return with any attachments, W-2s, 1099s, but I also send tax transcripts. They want to see that, as well as pay stubs for the last 6 months or other proof of ongoing income. And so that becomes really important. They really want to check up on that. Now, some people are not earning income. They could make up for it by using assets, but we have to get into the bank accounts and have bank statements for the last 12 months to show on average they make a certain amount of money. And that certain amount of money they make or they have assets varies depending on the household size, and it increases every year. So this video, it's hard to say exactly what fits your situation because I don't know the household size of the U.S. petitioner in your case, as well as what year it is to see if they've risen the standards because of inflation, how much the minimum is. So it varies a lot, but you can use assets if you have a consistent amount over the last 12 years above a threshold. I'll give an example right now where it's 2020. It's around $22,000 they expected income. You could check form I-864P for the exact number. This is for a household of two, the U.S. person and the foreign spouse. If they're earning that income on a regular basis, that takes care of that. If they don't, they can multiply that number by 3, which is around above $60,000, maybe $64,000-ish or $66,000. If on average they have that money in their bank account sitting there, or they have assets that are up to that amount or more, then they could satisfy that requirement, but it is discretionary. And I don't like using assets because some officers don't like it, and so they might still create a problem where you might need a joint sponsor in that condition, a third party that could take the position of the sponsor, and they're getting more strict on that too. Sometimes they want it to be a relative, for example, or someone really close to the family, even though the regulations don't require it. Now, when using assets, there's a lot more documentation that has to happen. As I mentioned, if you have that money in a bank account, you need 12 months worth of bank statements to show the added up average every month comes out to above the minimum threshold for assets. Now, but if you're using at home, they're going to want a home appraisal, which costs money and is just annoying. And so you get the home appraisal, so you get the true value for the home. You see how much equity and debt you have in there, and that kind of puts it together how much assets you have. But it's a complex scenario. You could use automobiles too, but your first car that you use for primary purposes cannot be used. The second car would happen. Sometimes people have an expensive car, a cheaper car. We'd use that cheaper car as a primary, the more expensive one as the one used as an asset. So these are the things that get more complicated, and you definitely want to talk with an immigration attorney for help with that. Some people have brokerage accounts that have a lot of money, investment accounts, and we look into that and see how we can explain it to USCIS or to the embassy to satisfy them. But in general, I don't like using assets because it's not as easy for them to understand that a regular paycheck is. So that's the old requirement, the minimum, which was the Form I-864 Affidavit of Support. However, now things have gotten more complicated. There's a new, more stringent public charge rule called the Declaration of Self-Sufficiency if you're doing it in the United States, Form I-944, or the Form DS-5540 to analyze your financial background. Form DS-5540 is used when you're going through the embassy system. And it's a better form because it's less intrusive and asks for less information. Primarily looks to see if you've done bankruptcy before, you had committed bankruptcy, the foreign person, and if they have any debts in the United States or use public services in the United States, along with some more financial and business kind of questions about education, work history, all that kind of stuff. But it's much simpler than the USCIS form I-944. That's a super complex form that takes a lot of time, and we're still battling to figure out how it's going to work. But in that, they want to see health insurance issues. They want to see bankruptcy issues, if they ever got public benefits, how much money they make. And it's a higher standard of analysis to judge whether that foreign person is able to take care of themselves in the United States. And if you're underage, a minor, if you're overage, a retired person, that's a negative because they'll say you can't work in the United States, so that's not good. If you don't have full education, that's not good. If you don't speak English fluently, that's not good. So there's a lot of different ways they're going to get you. And the health insurance aspect is really annoying because health insurance in the United States is very expensive. They expect you to have it with really no tax credits or benefits from the government. So you have to pay full amount for the most part. And so that becomes really annoying. And the documentation of the health insurance is very specific if you read the instructions, which is very difficult to get because I've had health insurance my whole life in the United States. I don't have the documentation they ask to prove health insurance that they do in the instructions for Form I-944. So it's a ridiculous situation. Hopefully it gets better, they ease it up, but we don't know if that's going to happen. But I wanted to let you know, so when you're starting this process, this was a general overview of the documents you need to have in your mind to get prepared. So, the I-130 petition, the initial part, it's about the relationship. The second part about your background, that's about the foreign person. If you're doing the case in the United States, that's submitted along with the relationship documents in most cases if you're married to a U.S. citizen. If you're marrying a green card holder, it may happen at the same time or they may separate when that's required. And if you're doing it through the embassy, that information about the background of the foreign person is separate too. That happens later on when the interview happens. And the financial portion as well, if you're doing the embassy route, comes with the background information of the foreign person. So in the consular processing setting, we send first the information about the foreign national, about the relationship to make sure it's real. Once that's approved, then we send information about the foreign person and their finances to the embassy. If you're doing the fiancé visa, again, we prove out the engaged relationship is real. Then we deal with the embassy, financial stuff, background kind of stuff. And then they come to the United States. We again have to submit background stuff and financial stuff. But if you're in the United States, you can submit all at the same time if you're married to a U.S. citizen. Or if you're married to a green card holder and the timetables work out, there's no lines for spouses of green card holders, you can submit all of it together as well. So this was a quick recap of the documents you need to have ready for a marriage green card case. Hopefully that helped. Definitely download the Ultimate Marriage Green Card ebook at www.marriageimmigrationlaw.com that has this information and more and can really be the initial step that you need to take to get the green card process started for you and your spouse. Congratulations on getting married and wanting to start your life in the United States. I wish you all the best.